We all want to be happier, but how do we get there? First, we start by realizing happiness is not a destination. Being happy consists of micro action steps every single day. I'm your host, Brittany King, and I'm here to guide you along the way. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Positively Real podcast. I'm your host and coach, Brittany King, and this month we are talking all about relationships. And relationships are the foundation for everything in our life, whether it's a relationship with another person, a relationship with ourselves, relationship with food, money, all the things. And that's why I wanted to bring these episodes and interviews to you. So I have a very special guest with me today. I have Charisse Cook, who is an attachment-based psychotherapist and an author with over 20 years of experience in relationship dynamics. So Charisse is an online educator with a mission to mend the fabric of relationships through understanding emotional resilience. And so when this came inbox, I was like, done and done. These are all things that I have been working on personally, things that I've been helping my clients with, and especially the emotional resilience piece. And so much of my story has come from healing past relationships. So this conversation just made so much sense to me to have today. So welcome to the show.
Here it is. We're going to have a great conversation. I'm really amped.
I'm so excited. I mean, this, you've been doing this for 20 some years, but I maybe you can attest to this, but I feel like attachment styles and attachment theory has been getting a lot of traction lately. You've probably been over here being like, yeah, this is what I've been talking about, people, but there has definitely been a big shift in the way that people talk about relationships. And I've noticed more and more that attachment theory has really started to become mainstream to talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm in England, in London, and this is the birthplace of attachment theory. John Bowlby was a British psychotherapist and researcher, and so it's fantastic for it to be mainstream now. Yes, it is a bit like, hold on, we've been talking about this for a while in therapy. But yeah, for people to just literally be saying, oh, well, I'm really avoidantly attached, so I'm like this, is just part of their conversation and even dating, I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Definitely. And it's funny because it does become kind of like this conversation or just a common language. Because when I talk to clients, even before we start working together, they'll tell me their attachment style. They'll be like, I am anxious attached and I'm dating this guy that's avoidant. And it's just like, so I love being able to be like, yes, we can just get past the surface level stuff and actually talk about this and really work together to find a solution that works for everybody. So this is amazing. So give a little background about how you got into this and then we'll dive in.
Well, I've always been interested in psychology. I studied it as an undergrad and just fell in love with it. And that was actually in South Africa. I studied that. And then I came over to England and I started doing volunteer work just out and around. And then I actually had a boyfriend at the time who was working at a treatment center, like a rehab. And he would go there. And I was very jealous of this job of his. I'm like, why are you doing this? I should be doing this. I'm the one that studied psychology. So anyway, he got me in and I got a job and I started volunteering there. And it was just a really great fit. I love them. They love me. They said, please come on. We want to take you on. We'll train you up. We'll invest in you. We'll pay for you to do your master's. It was a dream come true. It was an absolute dream come true. And the great thing about treatment centers that I just love so much is that it's just this melting pot of people and what we do when we're scared, what we do when we want love. And I very quickly became interested in love addiction, which was a fairly new thing, sort of 25 years ago. And so really worked with all the patients on sex and love addiction and ran groups. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there that, relationships is kind of my thing that I do. And I started my own treatment center after that, actually. And then I've been in private practice now for well over a decade. So for me, all roads lead to relationships. So that's why it's just kind of, it's become a specialty because that's what we all need to really be living happy lives.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more. And isn't it so interesting how when you are aligned with your purpose or what you're meant to do, how things
Mm.
just happen like that? Like we want to bring you on, we want to pay for your masters. Like there's just, you're like, it's just happening because it
Yeah.
was meant to lead you there.
I am
I
so grateful for that because I love my work so much, and it really does feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And I know not everyone has that. You know, as I get older, I really see that that kind of job fulfillment is not a given. So
Mhm.
yeah, I really, it's an incredible gift, huge.
Yeah. And it just helps so many people. I was talking about this the other day because the time of this recording, this is in June, and we had just celebrated Father's Day. And I was like talking to my husband about how his relationship with my daughter is like the foundation of her future
Mm.
relationships. And it's such an
Yes.
important role. Like it's so like I cry when I watch them because I didn't have that, which is why I have anxious attachment style. And it just like I was very emotional just because watching and seeing it unfold over the past 2 years. And like you don't understand that this is creating such a foundation for her relationships in the future. And we just don't even realize how important, or especially as
Mhm.
parents, our role is for these early years. So, yeah,
Yes.
the work that you're doing is very, very important. So,
Mm.
I've talked about attachment theory on the podcast before, but I always love hearing different people's way that they describe it and their vocation and how they view it. So let's start there. If someone has not been paying attention, as you're saying, it's very trendy to talk about attachment styles. How would you describe attachment style therapy?
Well, attachment styles give us a really great roadmap into understanding our behavior. But I think more than that, it really gives an insight into how we love. You know, I say love is learned,
Mhm.
exactly like you're describing with your daughter. Your daughter is learning what it feels like to be loved, to be cherished, to be able to rely on someone, to get, soothed and held when she's distressed. That teaches us what we can expect from other people, how safe the world is, how likely we are to get our needs met. And if we experience those things growing up, we're going to grow up and have what we call a secure attachment. We have security within ourselves and we feel secure within relationships and the world. It's when we don't have that consistency of care, when we are missing out on certain things, or things are unpredictable, or the home's a bit dysfunctional, and there's maybe illness in the home, mental illness that's not being treated, then we're not so secure because sometimes our caregivers aren't there in the way that we need, or they're more focused on other things. And then that's when we can then become quite insecure in how we attach because we didn't unfortunately develop a lot of security growing up. We developed insecurity, and that can manifest in a more anxious way of attaching, or a more avoidant way of attaching. So it's a kind of, it really speaks to the level of safety we feel in our relationships,
Mm.
how secure or insecure we are, and then our personality and how we respond to insecurity. There are a number of little avenues we can go down, which become our defensive ways of relating, our defensive ways of experiencing love.
Mm. Oh, okay. That was such a great explanation. And as you're as you're like talking through it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, especially when I think about my own story and healing journey. That's you described my household. Like on the outside, you wouldn't think that at all. Like you wouldn't have any idea that there was dysfunction and all these things happening inside. And it makes so much sense when I look back at all of my past relationships. I'm like, wow. And it really just like takes that thought that there's something wrong with me. And this is the work that I've done and be like, oh no, there's nothing wrong with me. Like this is just how I learned about relationships and the world. And so it is like one of my ultimate missions. I'm like, I can't protect our children from all the bad things that happen in the world, but if we can teach them secure attachment and how to be emotionally resilient, I'm like, then we've really done our job. And that is like, it's not easy to do, but it's definitely worthy work. So
Yeah.
let's, one of the things about past relationships affecting current. Like that was my
Mm.
pattern. I feel like so much of the work that I do, that I got into personal development, was healing my past relationships. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, of course,
Mm.
until later on. But I was in a very unhealthy, toxic cycle of dating. And it was full of just needing love, needing security, needing assurance, needing validation, and then sabotaging it. Like it was just, that cycle was so
Mm.
like potent in my early 20s, and I broke the cycle, but I didn't even realize like that was happening until again later on. So describe why, like how does our past affect our current relationships?
Well, just move sort of following on from me saying that love is something we learn. Love is a learnt behavior.
Mhm.
There's something really powerful about what we receive or don't receive growing up. And in therapy, we talk a lot about parents being attuned to their children. And we can't be attuned to everyone. And sometimes there's a genuine bad match between a caregiver and a child, and the caregiver doesn't just naturally understand or does never had it themselves to give,
Mhm.
and so needs go unmet
Mhm.
in us. And I think that is for me a very common thread that weaves through our insecure ways, which is there's a lack.
Mhm.
We come from some form of deprival, whether
Mhm.
that's validations, to your point about we then are going to seek validation later, aren't we? Whether it's feeling safe, we're then going to cling on to partners desperate to feel safe because that's something that we never had. Or if the relationships when we were younger were kind of difficult and fractious and stressful, we will avoid relationships. Why on earth would we want to go into these relationships if we've learned that they can be such sources of stress and can be very, very painful and can be very rejecting? So it's kind of the past lives on in us very, very powerfully. And I always encourage people to dig deep into themselves and say, what have you learned? What did you learn? Think about what happened. Think about the experiences that you had growing up. Think about past relationships and see the patterns playing out and what you learned about relationships, what you learned about how easy it is to trust, what you learned about how people listen to you or they don't, what you've learned about how important you are in people's lives and how much of a priority you can be. These are things that we really have to begin to deeply, deeply understand because they will play out in our lives, not just our romantic lives, our work lives, our friendship lives, you name it. But these themes are really important because I'm very keen on noticing the patterns of behavior that we will just unconsciously repeat unless we have the awareness around them to start doing things differently and then creating something new moving forward.
I love that. Because Dean, I find that's the hardest part, is creating something new moving forward, because we tend to go to what's comfortable, because when it's comfortable, it feels familiar, and that's safe, but it's a false sense of safety. It's
Mhm.
just what we know. It was so interesting in my journey with relationships. I just remember waking up. It was kind of one of those moments where I woke up one day and I was like, I need to make a change or else I'm going to end up alone forever. Cause that was my
Wow.
biggest fear, was to be alone. So I would cling on to relationships that were not serving me, and wherever I could get attention. And, at the time I was just judging myself. I was like, there's something it was so much shame tied to those behaviors. And now with all the healing I've done, being in this place, I can look back and have so much compassion for that young version of myself. She was just wanting to be loved. But that's all. And she didn't
Yeah.
learn love. Like, to your point, my sister and I always say, like, love is a verb, and you really
Mm.
learn it through your interactions. And I did not learn it in a way that, like, it was always like you had to hold on to it because it was going to go away.
Uh,
So, we talked about the past affecting the current relationships, and it's all unconscious, right? And so you
mm.
kind of just have these behaviors. So the awareness is the first step. And then what do you do from there?
Well, I think to talk about resilience in our relationships and to also talk about something which is kind of not really spoken about enough, which is emotional maturity in our relationships. Because if you think about it, you know, we, to the most part, especially when we're going through a tough time in our relationships, we are really, really young because it's touching those young wounds, those wounds that took place when we were little.
Mhm.
And in a way, that's where we kind of emotionally stop maturing in many ways. So the
Mhm.
fears that we have, even the reactions that we have, it's not to say they're childish, it's to say they are rooted in a very young part of ourselves that
Mm.
is much more survivalist in nature. We weren't able to just develop naturally growing up, having all our needs met and going through developmental milestones. We kind of had a bit of arrested development. And so once we become aware of our patterns and what's familiar to us and some of our unconscious behavior, there's something really important that we have to start to do. And that is we need to start to emotionally regulate.
Mhm.
Because when we are in relationships, there is nothing more activating or emotional than our relationships, right?
Mhm. Mm,
I
so
mean,
triggering.
the minute someone's not messaged back, or they've looked at us
Mhm.
in a strange way, or they don't agree with us, or they're not doing what we want, we go into a reactivity that is going to be so unconscious, and we're just going to start behaving and acting from a very old historic place. It's not going to be a well thought out decision. It's not going to be calm, rational. What's going to be the best for my relationship right now? We're going to react. And
Mhm.
depending how bad it is, we can react in full trauma response, or
Mhm.
any version thereof. So it's always a little bit surprising when I work with clients, when I sort of say to them, okay, we need to talk about emotional regulation.
Mhm.
Because when we're anxious, in a way, we recognize, okay, I do need to maybe soothe myself. I do need to calm down or take a time out. We can maybe recognize that, even though we don't really want to when we are really worked up and
Mhm.
upset, right? That's the last thing
Mhm.
we want to do. But also, if we have more of an avoidant process, we need to learn to emotionally regulate, because
Mhm.
when we're avoidant, we don't emotionally regulate, we emotionally shut down.
Mhm.
And that is not the same thing. So,
Mhm.
in a way, the resilience and the way to it is having awareness of how we react and why, and then having the skills and tools of emotional regulation to get back into control of what we're doing and be able to exercise a little bit of choice in what we're doing, because otherwise we are just in a constant state of reactivity in our
Mhm.
relationships. And I mean constant,
Mhm.
constant.
Mhm.
And we're often ready, waiting, primed for the next upset. And, we are just then recreating the familiar pattern of either being let down or someone not being there for us. So we're going to interpret everything as rejecting or disappointing.
Mhm.
And we are actually emotionally dysregulated in those moments. I think unless we have completely secure attachment, we need to accept that insecure attachment is a dysregulated nervous system, and
Mhm.
that can help kind of shut out a lot of the noise that comes with that.
I love that. That makes so much sense. And that, like, I've learned that over the past, say, like 5 years since I've been understanding and studying the nervous system, just in myself,
Mhm.
of shutting down. And whenever my
Mhm.
reaction is disproportionate to the interaction, and I now know the signals in my body, the thoughts that I have.
Mhm.
But it is, to your point, it's tricky because in those moments, even when you have awareness, it's almost like, for me, it feels like an out of body experience. Like, I'm like, I know I'm
Mhm.
acting childish. I know what's happening
Mhm.
and I can't stop it. I literally, I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I just act in a way, and through the compassion and through giving myself a lot of grace, it's gotten, and
Mhm.
just being able to connect with myself in those moments has gotten so much better. But for anyone that's listening that is just starting this work or is resonating with it, it's not that easy. It's
Yeah.
challenging.
Whoa. Yeah. The
It
vast majority of people don't do this because it is so
is
challenging. It really is.
so hard, but it's what happens after, which is what I find to be the
Mhm.
most. It's like I've learned to just kind of let go. Like, when I know that I'm triggered and I can't do anything
Mhm.
about like trying to talk myself out of it. I'm like, I'm dysregulated. Like, there's nothing I can do. It's what happens after that's helped me the most. So if you have a client that comes to you,
Mm.
how do you help them after? Because it's probably what a lot of your conversations are. It's like, this happened and this and this and this, and then
Yeah.
what?
Well, and I mean, that is learning through pain, isn't it? Because when you when you reflect back on what happened, we can get in touch with the pain. And something that I work on a lot with people, which is really important to me, which is, do you want to be like that, or do you want to learn how to sort of work on composure and really remaining dignified in your relationships? Because depending how extreme we are, we can behave in ways that in the moment, because we're probably consumed with self-righteous indignation or anger or, whatever, feeling very justified to be saying what we're doing, or saying, what we're saying, is we don't feel that we're not emotionally in tune with ourselves at that moment. It's only afterwards, when maybe the defenses come down a little bit and we go, you know what, I don't actually want to be that kind of person who says that kind of thing or takes that kind of tone, or I'm human and it sort of happened. But we can get into very bad habits very quickly in our partnerships. And we can start talking to one another in extremely disrespectful ways and feel very, very, very justified to do so. And then we're creating habits. And we need to be really, really, really careful. So by the time people come to see me, there are a lot of really bad habits that are just unfortunately normalized within the partnership.
Yeah.
So I motivate people by really sort of speaking to who they want to be. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be in this relationship? Do you want to give grace? What do you want to embody? Do you want to embody love? Do you want to embody anger? Because we really do get to choose. And the more we do that, the more we can see ourselves, I think, and see our behavior. And that's not to say we don't let it all hang out and lose it and everything, as you described. We all do. I do on the regular. But my recovery
The
time just gets
recovery.
better and better. And my ability to repair, not
Yes.
hold on to grudges, not take minutes or hours rather than days or weeks. That's a sign of really, the emotional maturity and the robustness. Things are going to go wrong. We're going to get irritated. We're going to get let down. Big things might happen. But being able to preserve who we want to be, but also preserve the relationship, I think that needs to become more of a priority, because we can be very reckless with our relationships. We can do damage, and in the moment we don't care and whatever. But actually, as you move along in your relationship, you'll learn it's precious, and we actually need to, handle it with care. We need to be really quite gentle with what's going on.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. It's like the recovery is where it matters the most, and the ability to repair and take responsibility for your own emotions, because that's how I define emotional maturity, is recognizing like you are responsible for your emotions and not putting it on someone else, which is a tricky thing, especially in those moments of activation, and it's something that's triggered
Yeah.
from the past. But I think, it's the most important work. I feel just doing this myself so liberated, and I feel like it keeps getting better and better, like knowing what's actually happening inside of me, and then how I can recover from those challenging moments moving forward. So, you mentioned, the being let down and disappointed. I'm watching this with my daughter. Disappointment is a tough emotion for humans to feel. I feel like
Yeah.
meltdowns and tantrums come from
Yeah.
the feeling of disappointment and not knowing how to regulate it. Like, I'm seeing it in real time. And specifically in relationships, it's so tricky. So can you explain, you know, breaking that cycle of being let down, feeling disappointed in
Mhm.
relationships?
I love this subject because what I observe in my clients, if they're insecurely attached, and whether that's any version of being anxiously attached or avoidantly attached, of which, the dismissive attachment and the fearful avoidant attachment, there's a lot more similarity in these insecurities than we realize. And one of them is that everybody is disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our go-to. That's our kind of landing spot. We are disappointed. And there's this, this is the real sad legacy that we have, really, because we were disappointed growing up. We were let down. We were hurt. Things weren't right for us. And that again talks of a lack. It talks of a deprival. It talks of a neglect, and all sorts of messaging that many of us should not have received, and was really, really sort of sad. And so what that does is it just creates this this life view that the world and people are disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we use confirmation bias,
Mm-hmm.
right? We
seek
just,
that evidence, got to prove it
yeah,
true.
that's it. And I mean, unfortunately, yeah, a lot of things can be interpreted as disappointing. If a teacup isn't washed properly, we can really turn that into us being majorly let down. If that's what we're expecting, and if that's what's familiar to us, I think that's a really sad thing to be. And so I like to kind of bring a bit of humor into this kind of thing about, well, let's just for a week, let's observe everything that disappoints you and kind of take the potency out of it a little bit. And then the next week we kind of break it all down, and people make lists for me, and it's preposterous, and it's silly, and it's really great to kind of bust that, because in a way I want to get to the actual disappointment. Let's get to the actual kind of trauma that is underneath that, about what we expect from people, how little we feel we can rely on people. And that's much more the work. And then when these things happen in life, we are not interpreting that as something that is disappointing, because if we're not careful, it can 100% become our stance in relationships. And then that's when our partners will start saying things like, oh, well, they're never happy anyway.
Can't
There's
do
nothing
anything
we
right.
can't do anything right, blah, blah, blah. And then that just perpetuates our pattern. And then we will often be in relationship with someone who has internalized the disappointment, and thinks they are a disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
And so our messaging will be, you are a disappointment, which fulfills their kind of pattern and expectation. And then whatever they do, we will interpret as disappointing, which confirms our pattern and our expectations. And then this is how we really fulfill one another's wounding and kind of perpetuate the patterns. So the disappointment, I feel, is a little bit of a sheep in wolf's clothing. We need to watch out if we are perennially disappointed in our relationships. We need to wake up to that, because it speaks of something much bigger that needs to be addressed, and it's taking away a lot of the joy and good stuff in our day-to-day relationships.
So what's your perspective then on having expectations in a relationship? Because when I hear, people have these expectations that someone, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship, or even with your family, having a list of expectations and them not being met, it's just, you're always going to feel disappointed like forever, because the other person might not be aware of what your expectations are. And then that's also saying that they're responsible to meet those expectations, so you can feel good about yourself. So what is your stance on that?
Well, I think they need to be non-negotiables in relationships that are very important, and we need to have limits, because many of us can be a bit codependent, or we can be people pleasers, or we might be super, super anxious, and so we accept all sorts of bad behavior. So it's really important to have non-negotiables and to have kind of standards, I guess. That for me feels separate to having expectations. Expectations is like a day-to-day thing. And in the context of this disappointment idea, I think expectations really are something that we do where we set up our partners to fail. And that is absolutely important that we see that. It's kind of, we can take a perverse enjoyment in feeling let down by others the whole time, and poor us, and we never get what we want, and we need to be really, really careful, because if we are going against our non-negotiables, that's a different story, because then we are really sort of fulfilling patterns, and we're in dangerous territory. But if we're in relationships with fallible human beings who are going to make mistakes and are imperfect, just like we are, stuff's going to happen all the time. And if we are reacting to every small slight and every undercut expectation, we are coming from a place of trauma there, and we are setting up our partners to fail. And that is part of the problem. That's not part of the solution. It's going to be very difficult to move forward if we are in a stance of always experiencing that. And I mean, in a very kind of tough love kind of a way, we are perennially putting ourselves in the victim position. And I don't want that for us. I do not. That is not esteeming or empowering. We need to be careful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, it puts you in such a victim mindset. And then, like you said, with confirmation bias, you're just constantly looking for evidence. And in the moment it feels good, but it's so disempowering and it's so limiting. And it's tricky.
Yeah.
It's definitely something, because I think the way you learn about relationships, you hear like, oh, I have these expectations. And I love how you explained like having standards and non-negotiable is completely different than having expectations. And when I hear, standards and non-negotiables, that's kind of where boundaries come in for me, of like, what is the boundary here? Like, if you grew up in a household where, your dad was always yelling at your mom, and you find yourself in a relationship like that, it's not necessarily an expectation, it's a non-negotiable, it's a boundary. It's like, if you yell at me about, XYZ, I'm going to leave the room. I'm not going to take it. You know what I mean?
Love
So I
it.
think like having that distinction is huge, especially for people that might realize by listening to this that they do have a lot of expectations for their partner or friends or whoever they have challenging relationships with. And it's just such a nice reframe into having standards and non-negotiables instead.
Well, actually, I really love how you asked that question after we just talked about being disappointed the whole time, because some of us may not even be consciously aware of this process. And that's a little bit of a giveaway. If you're disappointed the whole time,
Yes.
maybe you have a whole load of expectations that are either, going to be unfulfilled and are impossible to be fulfilled all the time. And that's your position. Or you are expecting to be disappointed the whole time. And trust me, if that's what you're expecting, that is what you will see and get.
1,000%. Yeah. So it's just like, it's the awareness. It's that, ooh, like I'm feeling that. And what's so important, especially when you listen to these types of conversations, is not to have any judgment on yourself, because you can't learn from judgment, because that can lead to shame. It's just more curiosity of like, oh, that's interesting. I do feel disappointed a lot. I've heard my partner say, I just can't win. I can't ever make them happy. And it's just like the little check engine light of like, hey, you might want to start paying attention to this. So this leads me into my next question, because the work that I do, I've been doing a lot of breath work, coaching, and it's like breath work integration coaching. And we do talk a lot about relationships, because I do think relationships are windows into ourself, tend to hold up a mirror, or like we said in the beginning, they're very triggering. And sometimes we don't understand why, but I do think that there's this element of shadow work that comes with relationships, and not just partnerships. I mean, like anyone, like it could be anyone. It could be someone random on the street or someone on social media that you don't know. Like, it is so interesting. It's like holding up a mirror to a part of yourself that you've either suppressed or that you don't love. So I'm very curious about your stance on shadow work, relationships, how we can use our relationships to look into the parts of ourselves that we have pushed so far away.
Well, this is where I like to, in a way, bring my therapist training into the room, because, obviously being a therapist is all about being non-judgmental and being really, really curious, but also being open to everything. So let's hear the good stuff, and let's also hear the dark stuff, and let's hear the ugly stuff, and really wanting the whole picture, and doing so in such a way where we can really take the riches out of everything. And something that is great about a therapist is that we are our own tool. So when we start feeling something about a client, or maybe a client's projecting something on us, or we feel a certain way, we have to do that work of thinking, why am I feeling this way? What is this bringing up in me? And some of it, and being really honest about it, because that can help us understand our clients, but also deepen ourselves. And, it becomes this kind of whole thing. And that's why, psychotherapy, I will, attend really hilarious lectures because they'll have titles like hatred in the therapeutic relationship or whatever. It's like we have to go to these places. And so I think if we can take away the shame, as you say, and the ickiness and the fear around aspects of ourselves that we really don't want to own, that is something really exciting. And for us to really reframe what that looks like, because when I'm working with people on their relationships, it's amazing for people to get a place of honesty with themselves and each other, that they can say things like, I hated you when you said that. And this animal came out in me, and I just wanted to do this, or I just wanted to say that, or kind of whatever. And we suddenly are going into the most real space imaginable. And from that, it sounds weird, but someone can feel really loved because they are passionately, deeply loved in the most primal ways. And so, so I just like to explore this work by really saying the unsayable. And sometimes what I will do is I will leave a box in my waiting room, and I'll say, anything that you couldn't say in the session, please write down on a piece of paper, and you can anonymously leave it. And then I will figure it out, or whatever, but I will know. And then we can slowly desensitize people to talking about emotions and thoughts or parts of themselves that they would never own up to otherwise. And looking at that in the context of our fear of losing people, our competitiveness with other people in our life, particularly in relation to our partner, jealousy, possessiveness, all of these parts to us that we don't readily own, that for me is like a really exciting thing.
Yeah, it's like, it is not comfortable, but it is insight to help you feel more whole. Because that's, I think what happens is we have this disconnect within ourselves, and we push those parts so far away. But in relationships, it really, like, there's no hiding. I mean, there is, you can distract, avoid, resist, push it down.
Yeah.
But when you start doing this work, it's like you can't unsee it. Like, just having that awareness, and like you said, of like, oh, like, what is it about this conversation that's bringing this up in me? And it's like, oh, like, this is me, not the person. And I think what happens with so many people that don't have the awareness is it's always the other person. It's never themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's just them. And like, it's like, if you don't pause to just take that moment to check in with yourself, that you're just doing yourself and your relationship such a disservice.
For sure. And something that I think happens a lot in attachment is that we can get lost in the drama. We can get lost in the latest disagreement, the latest fight, a lot of the blame game, as you say. I mean, that people can spend their lives doing that. And it's actually quite rare to step out of that drama and to really be more human and dig a little bit deeper, because 100%, I think, don't the Buddhists say, anyone can be Buddha when they're alone. It's like the minute we're in contact with another human being, or having a relationship, having an intimate relationship, or sharing a home, or raising a family, I mean, these are our greatest opportunities to learn and to expand our awareness. And for me, expand our consciousness of what it means to love, because many of us come from such a restricted understanding of love, such a distorted understanding of love. But to really love ourselves and each other in our entirety is amazing. And I think children really help us with this as well, because they're not quite so reserved or hiding of their more primal instincts and drives. And so we can be reassured and we can go, yeah, we are all little animals and we want what we want, and we're going to take, and we're going to get angry, and we are selfish and we are jealous and we are petty. And I think there's something very freeing in that, and actually bizarrely, paradoxically quite transcendent about that. We, it's almost in accepting that we become something better.
I love that, because it is, I think it all the time with my daughter, especially when we talk about needs. It's like we come into the world knowing what our needs are. Like, it doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m. It doesn't matter if you're in line at a grocery store, right? Like, it doesn't matter, because we intuitively know what we need for survival. We can't do it ourselves. That's why we have to vocalize it in a way that might be inconvenient for our caregivers, right? But we forget it. We forget it because of, the things that happen along the way. So it is like such a beautiful reminder of that, by being like, I like feel like I'm just watching just all of these things happen in front of me every single day. And it's hard, but I'm just so grateful for it, because it just gives me like a deeper understanding of all of it and myself too.
Yes. And a compassionate acceptance, as you say, because this is what it means to be human. I'm being shown.
Yeah. Like, this is the raw, real deal happening right in front of our eyes. And it's amazing and challenging, but it's truly like, I think doing this work simultaneously of, parenting and actually parenting. Like, it's funny, in the beginning, everyone's like, oh, you're such a good mom. I'm like, I've kept a human alive, which is a very important thing. Like, I don't know if the parenting has actually started yet. And now that we're, and she's almost 2.5, I'm like, oh, the parenting has begun.
Wow.
But it's really, so much of it is parenting myself. Like, I'm not like, it's me really being able to reparent myself, because I didn't have that. I didn't have the attunement, like you said. And my parents did the best they could with what they had. They had a lot going on, a ton of distractions, a lot of drama, a lot of emotional immaturity, and it's not their fault. But now I get to do the work and do my best to kind of change that narrative in our families. And the shadow work that you're talking about has been a huge part of that. And I will say, it is so uncomfortable to like have those moments, whether it's with your partner or child or what. It's like, you can't, once you start doing it, you just can't hide from it anymore. It's like, hi, like, this has been lurking in the shadows for all this time, and now it's coming out. So you have a choice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you are doing amazing work. It's really incredible, because I mean, that's what inspires me. Other people doing the work really inspires me, because it really does change things. And for me, having been in the business for a fairly long time, it feels like there's so many more people now that are really investing in their futures and wanting to change. And it wasn't always that way. So it is really thrilling to sort of see the change happening. And as a parent, that's our greatest kind of ability to kind of change everything, for the next generation. So I know it's a massive burden too, but it's like a great thing.
I agree. I think there's been such a shift in consciousness and awareness. And I think that it is changing the future generations, which it's so hard, but it's the best work ever to know that there could be a little bit better. It's not all going to be better, but just like a little bit. And that's, I think, the best that we all can do. So thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
No, it's been a really great conversation.
So good. Okay. So you have a book. So tell me a little bit about your book.
Well, the book kind of came about by really wanting to offer more of a solution-focused focus for people that are recognizing anxious or avoidant patterns in their relationships. I think there's so much out there that's quite theoretical. But so I really wanted to offer the tools and skills that I teach my clients. But what I also wanted to do was I really wanted to write in a much more accessible and compassionate and informative way about avoidant attachment, because it's a very sort of underserved part of attachment, especially, and there are two kinds. There's dismissive avoidant attachment, and there's what I call fearful avoidant attachment, also known as oh, crikey.
Is it disorganized?
Disorganized. Thank you very much. It's also known as disorganized attachment. So it's all very equally represented in the book, because I work with many avoidant clients, and I know that, we all want to change and do better. But I also wanted to kind of outline something which I think is really, really pertinent, which is we are not just one attachment style. How we attach is in constant flux, and it's also about who we're relating to at any given moment, and how we're feeling about ourselves and what's going on and how safe we feel, and relational dynamics. So I really want people to know all about the different kinds of ways of attaching. So I've written a whole massive chapters on traits to really recognize what they look like in person and in real life. So I was very fortunate. I was approached to write the book, and I was able to kind of deliver on it. But yeah, it's really exciting now. It's like a real guide to these are behaviors that aren't helping, to these are behaviors that we need to develop and kind of nurture in ourselves if we want to mature and if we want to become more secure. And I also talk about the dynamics in relationships. So the anxious avoidant dance, the anxious fusion, and the avoidant stalemate, which are all like relational dynamics as well that really need to be understood better.
Oh, I love that. I love that you have that approach too, of like, if you know what your partner's attachment style is, like what that dynamic looks like, and then offering solutions to have better communication, be on the same page. So someone that's listening right now, well, my first question is, can someone develop a secure attachment if they, have, and like you said, it's not just one, it shows up in all different types of relationships, but can someone that has, a dismissive avoidant or anxious attachment, can they develop a secure attachment in all relationships?
I want to say yes. Definitely. I mean, something that's, I think, quite liberating to realize is that the way our attachment style is often stress related. So it kind of speaks of how we cope with stress in relationships. So when we're fighting, for example, if I'm working with people, when they start having an argument in my consulting room, which happens quite frequently, you will see that everyone goes towards their preferred way of protecting themselves. And that can either be through some sort of anxious process or some sort of avoidant process. So I think when we do the work, when we're living our day-to-day lives, we can 100% get to a secure way of relating. And then the really hard work is the maintenance of that during times of stress, difficulty, and relationships have many seasons. We have good ones and not so good ones. And we can then manage those without being so extreme in our insecurity. I think that's really my goal. It's not to be perfect and secure all the time. That doesn't exist. But it's about de-extreming our behavior, because when we're really extreme in something, we aren't really in control of ourselves. We're in total defense. And that isn't recovery in my mind. Recovery is learning how to feel safe in the world, feel safe in relationships, feel safe in our body. So we don't have to react in such extreme ways for such a long period of time. The less extreme we can make our behavior for the shorter amount of time, that's, I think, something to sort of aim for. And then that's called being a human. It isn't, it's definitely possible, but we need to really find out what it is that brings out our defensiveness and really start working on realizing when it's appropriate to be defensive and when it's actually not necessary.
I love that. I'm so glad that came up, because as you were talking about it, like the thing that just kept coming up for me is the nervous system. Like it's truly how you learn how to self-regulate. And if you didn't learn how to regulate certain emotions as a child because you didn't have a caregiver that could help co-regulate. Learning it as an adult is
Yes.
the most important skill that you could possibly learn because you can see it play out in your
Mm,
relationships. Because it is, I remember something that happened with my husband, and my therapist said to me, she's like, "What was the threat?" And
mm.
it was just like a light bulb. I was like, "Oh, the threat was that he's going to leave," which, like, the situation did not represent that at
No, yeah.
all. Right. But
Yeah.
it was like this
Yeah.
moment of aha, of
Yeah.
like, yeah, the threat, my nervous system didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe in that moment, not because of him, but because of how my body was metabolizing the interaction. So as you were explaining that, I'm like, yeah, like it's like all comes down to the nervous system and being able to really learn how to regulate in those moments of distress and tolerate those difficult emotions, which a lot of us just didn't learn. I mean, generationally, where we're at, we didn't learn that. And so we can learn
Mm.
it now. That's the beautiful
That's
thing.
it.
We're learning it now.
We are so, so, so lucky. That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional regulation is like my fave. I think for me,
Yeah.
it's like two things. It's emotional regulation and then recognizing our distorted thinking.
Yeah.
Because when we are dysregulated, all our narratives come out like, oh,
Mhm.
people are like this, and oh, you can't do that. We have
Right.
these scripts. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing to realize
Yeah,
that.
it is. It's like very, yeah, like you can tell when your thinking is very generalized and it's black or white
Yes.
or all or
Yes.
nothing. And I think that's why learning about your nervous system and understanding your thought patterns when you are dysregulated can really
Yes.
help you regulate. Maybe not 100%, but be like, oh,
Yes.
I'm having these types of thoughts again.
Yes.
That must mean I'm dysregulated. And I've noticed that with myself of like,
Yeah.
oh, like when the thoughts are pretty negative and I'm like complaining, I'm
Yep.
like, oh, there's a little dysregulation going on in here. We gotta do a little
Amazing.
grounding.
That's
It's
right.
crazy. So amazing. Well, I will definitely put this book in the show notes. Amazing. I'm going to read it. I can't wait. It's just, I love learning about all of these things. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with me and my audience. So thank you, thank you, thank you. What is one thing that someone can do to take away today of what we've talked about?
I think when we're dealing with our relationships and we're going through a difficult time, I really want to just remind everyone that we cannot trust our thoughts.
I love that. Don't believe
Right?
everything you think.
Just because you think it does not make
The
it
truth.
so.
Mhm.
Okay, there will actually be a much sadder story that is much more historic in nature that our thoughts are trying to reveal to us in these moments. Do not despair. I think we can get very despairing, very disparaging in our relationships with ourselves and with other people.
Mhm.
And we have a distorted thinking problem, and that's not a negative, that's not me being just,
No.
rude. It's just about it's freeing to recognize
Mhm.
I'm thinking from a place of fear and wounding here. I'm not
Mhm.
thinking of a place of love and abundance and self-esteem.
Mm.
And so, yeah, recognize when you're thinking familiar, unhelpful thoughts and do not believe them.
Not believe them. I love that. I've already decided I wanted to put something like that on a shirt. Don't believe everything you think. I love,
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Becky's work. And
Mm.
she's just been so amazing with learning everything about parenting. But one of her strategies is that what's the least generous interpretation and what's the
Mm.
most generous. And it
Yes.
is so true. Like the least generous is just these old stories, these old
Oh,
narratives, and it's just
yeah.
it's not the truth. And
That's it.
typically the most generous interpretation is so much closer to the truth. We don't actually know what the truth is. It's an
Totally.
interpretation, but when you really break it down. So that just reminded me of that. So, well, this was
Beautiful.
such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for your
Ah,
time. I'm looking forward to continuing to learn from you and share this with my community.
thank you so much, Brittany. It was amazing chatting with you.